Welcome to Grid Talk. My name is Ruby, and today we're here to preview the 2025 Dutch Grand Prix. Joining me today, we've got Owain Medford
Hello.
and Louis Edwards.
Hello.
Hello. I hope you both had a good summer break because the summer break is finally over. It's race week if you're internet inclined. And obviously, with the end of the summer break comes Formula One once again. And I don't know about the two of you, but I've been craving some Formula One action, being ready for it to come back and actually occupy my weekends once again. But the weather itself that's going to be hitting Zandvoort might not be so summery. We're expecting light rain showers and a fresh breeze and maybe even a bit of thunder on qualifying. And Owain, I'll start with you. What does this kind of signify for the F1 weekend?
If it's anything to go by a few years ago, absolute chaos in pit stops. Honestly, Zandvoort seems it's such a different track anyway, just by itself. It's so tightly confined. So if rain hits one part of the circuit, it's usually going to hit the rest of it too. But I think it's going to mean sort of shaky ground, and we're going to kind of wonder whether we actually get qualifying at all if it's heavy rain. It should dry sort of quite quickly, given that obviously Zandvoort is quite a very cambered circuit in places, and the fact that it's near the beach, and wind always helps. But hopefully we do actually get a qualifying session and the rain isn't too heavy. But apart from that, it will probably just mean chaos, just pure unbridled chaos in the shortest pit lane on the calendar.
That's what we love to see, a bit of pure unbridled chaos. But no, absolutely, it does bring that element of variability. And, just provided we actually get underway in the first place, I'd like it to be a bit more straightforward. And I think easy for people watching it to understand what's going on because, for at least the more recent times when we've had wet races or, we've done that formation lap and then everything's gone back to just being under gazebos. You've got the commentators all going, so has the clock started? Has the clock not started? What's actually going on? And then we're here sat around going, yeah, has the race started? Are we going to get a time affected race and things like that? But, going back to that context of the summer break, Louis, who who really needed that summer break and who do you think kind of needs to have had a good summer break?
I mean, I think the Ferrari team in general needed a nice, relaxing time after. I mean, Charles had, through very little fault on his part, a really bad Hungarian Grand Prix. He did possibly as much as he could, but was ultimately let down. And Lewis, his performances were somewhat underwhelming. So yeah, Ferrari definitely needed to take a step back, take some time to breathe, and really figure out how they're going to attack this second half of the season because it's not worked out, I think, nearly as well as they'd hoped this first half of the season went. And then there's just a few drivers that I'm sure will take a little bit of comfort. Max, again, didn't have a brilliant Hungarian Grand Prix. The last few races haven't been some of Max's best performances. Not very typical of what we've seen from Max this season because he has been absolutely incredible in patches. But I think it's just coming to the point where that Red Bull is getting a little bit more difficult to drive compared to the likes of the McLaren. And honestly, the two McLaren drivers, it's a chance to rest and recharge because they know that the second half of this season is gonna be intense. There is only 9 points between them. Not that many races left. Lando, for one, needs to be thinking, how's he going to attack Oscar and try and chip down that championship lead even more? Oscar's going to be thinking Lando's got a bit of momentum coming from Hungary after executing such a great race. How is he going to fight back and hopefully win around a track which Lando completely dominated that last season? It wasn't really much of a competition after lap kind of 4 or 5. So yeah, there's a lot of drivers that I think will take comfort from the summer break, and I think Ferrari definitely being a team that possibly needed it the most.
Yeah, and Wayne, in that kind of similar vein, do you think Williams, they'll be another team that'll be looking to have, been able to turn things around over the summer break? Because of course they're not really doing a lot of development on their car this season.
Yeah, I mean, to that end, I don't think so. I hate to be a bit doom and gloom like the weather, but I don't think it's going to go well for Williams. I don't think the car is particularly well suited to Zandvoort in any way. It's the complete opposite of what they seem to have locked into their car development for the last few years. So for that reason, I don't think it's going to be a particularly positive weekend beyond the skill level of their drivers, which is obviously super high. They're really experienced, and that's kind of what Williams have been banking on and using really for all of this season, is the fact that they don't tend to get into too much trouble to Carlos and Alex. So because of that reason, hopefully with maybe some incidents in front, I think that's the biggest chance of getting higher up the grid, or and a rain affected qualifying would help, and using that to stay there. But apart from that, I don't think on pure pace they're going to be particularly competitive. And as you say, if they're not developing their car, I don't, as much as they may have a few little bits to bring, watch them bring a full upgrade package to to Zandvoort. But I don't imagine that they're going to be particularly sort of focused on doing too much in terms of big performance gains at this point in the season. It's too late, and as they've said, I mean, if I take them at face value, they've been working on 2026 for a while now. This is not a weekend that I imagine that they expect to get too much out of. That's the weekend after, or the race after it at Monza. That's and Azerbaijan, for example, as well. That's where they're looking to get their points. I don't think that they're expecting very much out of the Netherlands, and I don't think they will.
Yeah, particularly with that chasing midfield pack closing in, Aston Martin now only 18 points, I think it is, behind Williams, Williams being in P5, with their strategy of get as many points as we can in the earlier parts of the season and just try and hold out hope. It's somewhat reminiscent of Braun's, championship title fight in 2009, but for the midfield, but at the same time, Williams, they'll be watching over their shoulder because they're certainly not looking ahead. But yeah, I think, as you say, Zandvoort is not where their focus is. Their focus is more on Monza and Baku with those long straights where, we typically see Williams performing better. But let's think about the front of the field then, and, who really is looking for, the strongest of performances in Zandvoort. And Louis, I think really there's like 3 teams that are in the picture here, but potentially 4 if we're factoring in the podium as well. Is it really just between the 2 McLaren drivers, or could Verstappen maybe overcome his own Red Bull woes? And, is George Russell in the picture for something at least?
Well, they always say your home Grand Prix is worth a few tenths, and Max is always worth a few tenths on his own. So put the two together, and you're expecting something pretty good. Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to ever take anyone out of the equation. We've seen in recent Grand Prix that it's not always the McLarens that are going to necessarily qualify on top. Are doing such a great job in Hungary. That one lap pace is what McLaren's got to look out for the most. There are drivers out there and there are teams that are able to put, it together for a single lap, but it may not just work out over a race distance. And the added, problem of Zandvoort is there is less overtaking than there really is in Hungary. You've got one opportunity and one opportunity only, and it's not the most simple of overtake. It's not that slow of a corner. It's kind of more of a winding corner. So that's where McLaren need to really focus on, make sure that this one lap pace is sorted, and then pray basically for good conditions, good favorable conditions and if it's on qualifying day as well, then that's a whole other big can of worms that gets open there. So yeah, there is definitely potential for all 4 of those kind of top 4 teams to get pole and then make as much as they can out of the race. But ultimately, I think if we're going to go on race pace, it's going to be the McLarens. It's just going to be a case of if you qualify ahead of the McLarens, how long is it before? How long can you keep them behind for? And as Charles found out in Hungary, keep them behind for the first half of the race, but they'll come back at you eventually. McLaren take it cautiously at the beginning, but towards the end, they will go much faster. And that's what they've got to all look out for.
Yeah, absolutely. And Owain, in a similar vein, then obviously, mentioned that George Russell has a habit of turning up in P3 without doing anything. Is it potential for it just being George that's in the picture, or, can Antonelli like save his recent form and, actually have a more confident weekend, would you say?
I mean, as much as we make a big thing of his recent form, actually, like George Russell hasn't actually been third, apart from in Hungary, since Miami. So it's been quite a long time. But obviously, he's had some great performances since then. I think George is a class driver, so to be honest with you, I think it's unlikely to not see him up there. It's going to be a case more of whether Mercedes can get the car in the window. It's promising from the fact that they were relatively good in Hungary, and it seems to be the sort of track that kind of suits them. I find it difficult to get a sort of handle on Mercedes form as a whole generally. Obviously, Antonelli is complicating that, and I would hope that his sort of comfortability with the car is getting better. But unfortunately, he's not really lighting the world on fire, and he has had a run of a lot of retirements in the last sort of 8 or so races. So some due to him, some not due to him. I mean, that's obviously going to impact you a little bit. But his form before that was actually fairly good. He seems to have been knocked. I think his confidence is a little bit being rocked by that. Hopefully the summer break, I think maybe has given him a chance to reset. Obviously, I think Zandvoort's obviously not really like any other circuit. So, and I can't remember whether he's raced here before. I think he has, or at least would have done in Formula Two. But beyond that, I think I hope that he's going to do well, but I couldn't say for certain, to be honest, just given the fact that it's so unlike anywhere else. But yeah, I think Mercedes, if they get the car right, this should be a fairly good weekend for George Russell, and hopefully Antonelli, like I say, is kind of reset, comes back a bit stronger after what has been a disturbingly poor run of races, apart from that P3 in Canada.
Yeah, and there certainly is something to be said, I think, from a Mercedes perspective of protecting their driver, because there's been so much speculation in the media over that recent, bunch of weeks as to whether he would be, put out of the Mercedes drive and put into Alpine maybe for a season or two, just because of the fact he's not necessarily shown up and delivered at the standard that they were expecting and suggesting that he might be able to perform at. But at the same time, he is 18 years old, done his equivalent of A levels and stuff like that this year. He's over 10 years younger than me, and he's driving a car that's worth millions of euros and stuff. Like, it's crazy. But yeah, it'd be good to see Antonelli, I think, just put in some performances that show he's got a bit of confidence, a bit more trust in the car. If it is going to be wet, maybe it won't be one of those kind of weekends, but we'll wait and see. It's Formula One. Yeah, not expecting a 5-star performance from Antonelli, but a 5-star podcast nonetheless. This is certainly one of those. And if you agree, we'd love it if you could take 5 to leave us that 5-star rating on Spotify, or 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you're listening and aren't currently subscribed to the channel, please consider helping us out with a like and a subscribe. And also, why not check out our Patreon if you want some exclusive extra content, including a quiz show or two, some podcasts, and all that other fun stuff too. Yeah, so let's look at the midfield. Let's take a look at what's going on further down. And Louis, Aston Martin had a fantastic weekend in Hungary, and we were discussing just before recording this podcast if it was a blip or if it's just kind of like maybe they're actually finally here. What do you think?
Well, I think it's a bit of a it's a bit of both. I think they definitely do have tracks that suit them better than others. I think we see this big jump from, Fernando was scoring pretty consistently in Spain, in Canada, and then up to Spa, where Aston Martin had just a god awful weekend, qualifying right at the back, making very little in terms of improvements during the race. And then you go to Hungary a couple straight away, and suddenly they're both in Q3, they're scoring big points, and you kind of forget that they had such a horrible time in Spites. As a team overall, I still think it's so track dependent. It's almost they're just lurching from weekend to weekend and just praying that they get a decent result. It doesn't seem like there's that much vision, especially for this season. And fair enough, there's a lot coming and changing next year. There's no reason for Aston Martin to be throwing any eggs into this season apart from a prize money to keep the team somewhat afloat, and B, it's good exposure if they do well. It's not the end of the world if they don't, because let's face it, you get more wind tunnel time. It's not the end of the world if you start dropping down the table. But that saying, we're coming to another track that is somewhat similar to Hungary. It's a tight track, not a lot of high speed, which seems to be a problem for Aston Martin, and they could have another good race. Genuinely, it does sometimes just feel it's whatever Lance and Fernando are feeling that weekend is how they're going to do. If Fernando can be bothered, he tends to do pretty well. If Stroll can keep it at the wall, most of the times gets the odd point here. Both drivers are on equal 26 points. Yeah, it's this is what else you really can say from Aston Martin. They're not exactly a team that inspires much confidence, especially when it comes to the driver in the 18 car.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly something I think to be said as well for the fact that neither Fernando nor Lance really knew where the extra bit of performance came from in Hungary, and they brought a new front wing to the circuit. Maybe that's what it was, or maybe they just, as you say, showed up and actually cared. And I think we've seen a bit more recently. Lance Stroll seems to maybe have been told, "You're gonna have to start doing something, otherwise you're not going to be able to keep your seat." Because I think that's kind of definitely one element of Stroll's ambivalence towards good results, I guess you could phrase it. But Owain, slightly just beneath them, 1 point behind Sauber in P7. So, in this midfield fight, might we see Sauber causing a bit of disruption? Racing Bulls are only just behind as well. Bortoletto had a decent result in Hungary, and I think also points in Belgium as well. You know, how do you see Sauber and Racing Bulls playing a part in Zandvoort?
I'll start with Racing Bulls because I think it's less interesting. No, I think they've been fairly good. I say less interesting, like it's a bad thing, to be honest with you. Like it's by a smidge, which is how far they are behind Sauber. They seem to be the more cohesive of the Red Bull teams, despite the tumultuous nature of this season for them, obviously. And I think maybe that's a little bit of the hangover of Lauren Mecky's work. But, they've been putting in good results here and there, and it seems to be that they are actually doing what they're meant to be, which is a driver development program. Whether they actually make use of it, I think is, as always, up for debate when it comes to Red Bull. But looking at that, they seem to have had a fairly successful season. Obviously, they're peaking into points positions, in sort of sixth, seventh, and eighth, maybe the odd ninth or 10th, and I think that is sustaining them quite well. But they are going to have to be more performant and extract better from the car to overtake some of the teams ahead, because it's not that far to sixth in the grand scheme of things, and there are a good number of races for them to achieve that within. Obviously, just looking at Zandvoort, it's much more sort of, I don't know, it's much more difficult, I think, for them to get something out of it, because it's just, you've got to qualify well in general. I mean, I don't think they sort of going to get through on pure speed alone. Sorry, and because of that, because it's so small, and often we get sort of a few battles and cars in close proximity. I think they could run into each other. I don't want to wish ill on them, but that's very clearly a possibility for them. But they have been performing well of recently, and I hope that continues over the summer break. Sorry, after the summer break. When it comes to Sauber, I mean, that update that they had, I think was it Canada, or it might have been a bit later, but it's completely transformed their form. Obviously, Hulkenberger's got that third place in Britain, and it seems to be that they've actually, that they went from scoring 1 point and retiring a lot to, they've had a decent. I mean, they've scored points in the last six race weekends. So, I think a little bit. It's like the end of the half of game of football or rugby or something like that, where your team's starting to do well, and that halftime whistle just comes a bit too soon. I think they would have much preferred this. They'd have preferred this maybe another five races earlier. Obviously, I mean, obviously they'd prefer it right from race one, but given the turnaround that they've had, it's been really, really good, and obviously they'll be hoping it continues. If they've got anything left in the tank, it'll be worth it to use it, because I mean, just a decent performance in Zandvoort is going to take them above Aston Martin, and we don't know how they're going to perform. Is Aston Martin good because they could wind on the downforce and they're good at that? We don't necessarily know, but like I say, Sauber has seemed to have changed their car to something that they can drive very successfully, and they've been picking up points finishes in a crucial area of the time of the season. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think that will continue. I just hope that they don't get overtaken by any updates or anything like that, or have a horror weekend.
It has been nice seeing a team like Sauber actually doing okay so far for the last few races of the season. Just considering where they've come from, and you know, like all the history that that team has as its own independent thing. Granted, obviously, not so independent from next season, but yeah, I think just seeing that team working and actually doing it all right has been nice to see. But yes, let's just take another point just to look at the teams towards the back. And I feel like this is kind of a bit of a harsh indictment on Haas, but at the same time, Haas have always been one of those teams that does start off, you know, either middling and falls back or starts off at the back and just struggles for the rest of the season. But at the same time, Louis, there's also Alpine in the picture who are fundamentally at the back. And it's almost down to the fact that they've only really got one driver in the context of any race weekend. And Pierre Gasly has been doing bits to like at least put that team in the picture, but not the same can be said for the other two drivers that have occupied that seat.
Yeah, you do kind of feel bad for Pierre. This kind of last couple of years now, he's really having to drag that team, and he's unfortunately that's kind of been the story of Pierre Gasly ever since he kind of got sacked by Red Bull. It was, you know, when he went back to AlphaTauri, it was kind of him while Yuki was in his kind of formative years and he was struggling, and then he's gone over to Alpine and you know, he was battling out with Ocon, but as soon as Ocon's left, it's been Pierre, and then whatever mediocre driver's been in the second seat. And I don't want to, you know, speak too ill of the likes of like Jack Doohan or Colapinto, but they haven't been brilliant. And Pierre has been the one who's really had to just drag that team forward this season. And hey, look, he's doing what he can, but there's not really all that much performance in that Alpine. And you know, he has the great ability at least to get the points when they, you know, when they're there on the table, but otherwise he kind of just meddles around. And I think the same could be said for the two Haas drivers. The Haas, I wouldn't say that either Behrman or Ocon has had a bad season. I would say that they have been pretty good, and both of them have made big on the opportunities that they have been given. And Ocon has had some great results, you know, P5, and then Behrman has been making some great overtakes, really showing what he's made of. But when that Haas is no good, it really is no good, and both the drivers kind of just meddle outside the points and don't really tend to push forward. And that might just be the case again in Zandvoort. It really is feels like like a coin toss of are they going to do well? Are they not? They're going to either surprise us and get good points, or they're just going to kind of meddle down like at the back, which they effectively did in Hungary. So haven't got the highest of hopes. Like, don't want to be the big doom and gloom, but let's face it, at the end of the day, only 10 drivers can get points. And if you're going to put your money on it, you're not really going to look to Alpine. And it's really dependent whether Haas are going to get it. It's never a sure thing, especially when you've got the likes of Sauber who have really picked it up, started scoring points. Aston Martin can surprise you out of nowhere and get good points. Williams are never to be thrown out. Racing Bulls on their day can get points. The competition is just so intense in that midfield. Getting 1 or 2 points here and there sometimes may not seem like much, but it's genuinely the most that these teams can do.
Yeah, 100%. It is so tight from basically P6 to P9 in terms of the constructors, you know, that one good weekend can make a team, you know, jump up several positions in the constructors. And that's what these teams are currently thinking about. You know, it's like, where can we pick up these points and where can we have those good weekends? And where are we just limiting the damage? But speaking of damage, let's make some predictions for this weekend because, you know, we've got our own predictions league going on. I'll let Louis shine more of a spotlight on that later on. But, you know, we need some points. I need some points for sure. But I'll start off with you, Owain. What's your pole position, your podium, and your bold prediction for the Dutch Grand Prix, please?
Okay, so my poll is gonna be Piastri. I think in the thing is, I just can't not see Max Verstappen winning this. To be honest with you, it's just obviously he's been so kind of imperious here before, and I think there's a little element of I don't know how much time he spent at Zandvoort in his youth, but surely it was a lot. And he seems to sort of, you know, he seems to excel, and it really does give him, you know, that extra few tenths. So in that, with that in mind, I'm gonna give Verstappen. the win because I don't think it's going to be a huge margin. And there's been a summer break, and Red Bull tend to really come back after a summer break. I think after that, it's going to be Piastri in second. If they do get into a battle, I think that'll be quite interesting. And then in third, I'm going to go with, I'm going to give it to George Russell. I'm just going to give it to George Russell. I can see that. When it comes to bold predictions, you know what? I'm going to say that this is a result of, pace of being able to wind down the downforce and do well. And I think Hungary is similar enough to the Netherlands that Aston Martin are going to get another top 10 double top 10 finish.
Another double top 10 finish for Aston Martin. Wow, that is a bold prediction, but who knows? They might show up this weekend and actually deliver on it. Louis, how about your predictions? A pole position, podium, and bold prediction.
I am also a person who's in desperate need of points. So, I mean, you're talking to the bottom three people of our predictions league on Grid Talk right now. So, pole position, I'm going to go with Max Verstappen. I think, home crowd, home race. I think he definitely has the ability to put the lap together. However, I don't think the Red Bull is going to be able to maintain it in the race. So I'm going to kind of go something similar to last year, where it'll be Lando Norris who will then take the win from Max, Oscar Piastri close behind in second, and then Max Verstappen will round out the podium. And then for my bold prediction, I'm going to go kind of similar in terms of Owain with the back-to-back kind of idea, but it's going to be back-to-back-to-back points for Bortoletto.
Back to back to back points for Bortoletto. I like it. Rings off the tongue quite well as well. For me, I'm going to go pole position Charles Leclerc. I think he did a pretty good job in Hungary to do that. And I feel like if Ferrari show up and if Leclerc can just get his head down and some track space and stuff like that as well, maybe a pole position for Charles Leclerc. In terms of a podium, I'm going to put Lando on top. I think, maybe he might continue that pre-summer break momentum. I'm going to go Oscar Piastri in second because that's usually how those two have finished off the race next to each other, regardless of positions. And then for P3, I don't think Charles is going to keep that podium. I'm going to go for Max Verstappen because you can't discount him regardless of those, Red Bull woes. And it's a circuit that he's performed incredibly well at previously. And then for a bold prediction, Lewis Hamilton in the top 5 because it's been a while and he's had some poor form, and it would be nice to see a smile on his face. I think, that's certainly what Fred Vasseur is hoping for based on comments in the media. So those are our predictions. Get them locked in. Owain, if people want to hear more from you, is there anything you want to plug?
Unfortunately not. I don't have anything to plug. I'm sorry. I wish I had anything.
Have you got a multi-socket, something to charge?
I've honestly loads. What I've got to plug is not overloading your plug sockets. That's what I've got to plug. That makes it sound like I've had some kind of experience. I really don't.
Just being on a podcast with you is the experience, Owain.
There certainly is. What is that? What is that, Louis?
That's my plug socket with my tablet, laptop, and phone charger all in it.
Oh my goodness, that's worrying.
Sat on my fabric sofa.
Yeah, in your house, in your flat or slash house with paper walls.
What is this?
Exactly.
Oh, you didn't get you guys have missed out on the burgeoning comedy career I've got in the chat as well.
That's the next level of Patreon tier. Anyway, anything you want to plug, Louis?
And so you talked about it earlier, but I would like to talk about Grid Talk Predictions League that you can follow and see on all of our socials, especially on Instagram and YouTube, which is at Grid Talk UK. So yeah, if you go over there, you can follow and see what all of our hosts are predicting for this weekend. As I mentioned earlier, us three as a collective are not doing so good. We are currently sat at the bottom of the predictions table. So take our predictions with a grain of salt. But at the moment, the leaderboard is being headed, actually, it's a tie at the top between Aaron and Sophia, both on 59 points. So see their predictions and probably go, yeah, that's probably a bit more realistic. But yeah, every week hosts give podium, pole position. If it's a sprint race, it'll be sprint runner, and then a few other like wild card predictions. So if you want to tell us your predictions, please make sure to go over to our socials and join in on the fun.
Absolutely. And as long as I remain within one prediction race weekend's worth of points of P7, I have an excuse because I've missed a race. But that's my excuse, and as long as I remain within there, I'm gonna stick to it. But I can guarantee after Zandvoort it will be gone. It'll probably be gone. But yeah, in terms of me, I'm gonna plug our new merch store. As I'm fashionably wearing right now, you can get yourself a t-shirt. You can get yourself a very comfy hoodie, which will have the correct Grid Talk logo on it by the time it, comes to your house. If you decide to order that, links are in the description of the show. Do go and check that out. And at the same time, I've already mentioned our Patreon podcast as well. We've been having some fun. And, it's nice to just be a bit off kilter, a bit off script, and a bit off the restrictions of monetization. But if you want to hear Grid Talk anywhere else, we're available on YouTube as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Verbal, and Pocket Casts. Just search Formula One Grid Talk for our back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to the race results. Thank you to Jared Bradley and Holly Eagle for supporting us on Patreon. If you want to support the show further, why not sign up to Patreon for more exclusive content? And also, make sure you subscribe to the first to know when each new episode is released. We'll be back soon with plenty more F1 content. Thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast, and goodbye.